Hello, and welcome to our Passion for Moms webinar series, Motherhood Leaders Defining the Future. In this series, we have been talking to a variety of moms who have used their platforms in all the different ways that God has gifted them to raise up world changers, but also to make his name known in the platforms that God has provided to them using their gifts, skills, and abilities. Today, I am honored and excited to have my friend Blynda Lane on the program. Blynda, welcome.
Thank you, Shaman. Thank you for having me. So happy to be here.
Well, Blynda, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about who you are, how many kids you have, and anything you want to share with us.
Okay, well, so I'm from Texas, so I know we're a little bit far away. You're a Texas girl, though, so I know
Absolutely.
it's in your heart. So we live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. My husband and I, this December, will be married 25 years, so that's awesome. And so he is, thank you. He is the executive senior pastor of a church called Gateway Church here, Pastor Robert Morris, if anybody watching has heard of him. And so we've been here about 18 to 19 years. We've got 3 kids. Our oldest is almost 20 in October. She is a sophomore at Baylor University. Then we have a son who's a junior in high school, and then we have a daughter who's a freshman in high school. So this is the first time ever all of my kids are either high school and above. So it's a new season for us, but we're loving it so far. I mean, it's a very unique season because currently my kids are in their bedrooms Zooming for their classes. So it doesn't feel like they're fully in school yet, but they are. So, but yeah, so, oh, go ahead, sorry.
It's definitely an interesting time for all of us, whether it's college or high school, even for the moms of kindergartners, of having to navigate, this new season of how life works and how school works. So yeah, we can all empathize for sure.
Yes, it's so interesting because my daughter has been in private school all the way through, since kindergarten, all the way through 8th grade. And so this 9th grade year was her first year to enter the public school. So we've had a little bit of both because we homeschooled as well. So we've done them all. And she's entering the public school that my son goes to. But this is her introduction to public school. She's as homeschooled as she's ever been. She's in her bedroom doing school. I'm like, it doesn't feel that different, does it? So she'll get to have that, okay, I'm interacting with new people and making new friends. But so far, it feels a lot like what she's used to. So
well, it's a slow transition into high school then.
Yes.
Well, Blynda, one of the things that I would love to hear your perspective on, because you talked about having high school kids and now one that's launched in college. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of us as moms want to do the launch well. And in order to do the launch well, we have to prepare our kids for what that launch looks like. So just big picture, before we dive into anything specific, how has that personally been for you to now enter into the stage of everyone's in high school or college? Because I know it's a big transition to go from preschool and kindergarten where you're doing everything for them, and even middle school, you're still navigating a lot of different friend things and, hormones and all the things that happen in those middle school years. What's that been like personally for you of just entering into a whole new season?
It's interesting because I think every season has so many joys and some challenges as well. I have enjoyed this season of the ages of my kids so much. And I think part of it is because really for Todd and I, Todd is my husband's name, Todd and I, we always had this mentality that we were not raising good children. We were raising good adults. And so they're only children for 17 years, but they're adults from 18 for as many years as God has them on this earth. And so every season, we always had that in the back of our minds, that everything we're doing is because we want to raise world changers that are productive, God-fearing adults. And so when they're toddlers, that thought was so far away. It's like, no, right now I'm just trying to tame my toddler, even though I know that was our heart, but the moment called for just train the toddler. But here we have high school and college age kids. So that reality is in our face. We have one actual adult already, child, and then two that soon will be, within 4 years time, all of my kids will be adults. And so that reality is where we're living. And so for us, it's such a fun season of seeing a lot of those seeds that we planted starting to really grow and come to fruition. And so, for us, even just thinking, I remember I was in a parenting class one time and somebody said, don't let anybody tell you that those teen years have to be hard and have to be, that they're going to rebel and that. And I just getting that deep in my heart and began to pray toward that. Now, there's a lot of intentionality that has to happen for that to happen. It doesn't just happen, but it also does just happen by the grace of God. I can't very well say any of the great things that my kids did are because I'm just this amazing, great parent. I mean, the grace of God has covered our home. But because we have tried to apply principles, we tell our kids all the time, in life, when you don't know what to do, remember God's ways work. So when you seek God's ways, you're going to come out with a pretty good outcome because God's ways work. So when you seek the word, when you find him in the word, and when you try to find the answer for your specific problem by a principle he's laid out in the word, his ways work. And so you're going to be okay. So we try to do that in parenting as well. So in launching them, everything has been set up for this moment, in my opinion. It's all been set up to see them walk into adulthood. So when I have a 14, a 17, and a 19, it's just really, really fun to be around them because they're these really incredible humans who they of course, no kid is perfect. We aren't a perfect family. We learn and we grow, but they are kids who they love the Lord and they love us and they love each other. And so there's a lot you can work with when kids' hearts are malleable like that, when you've got their heart. And so for launching, having gone through that with Olivia and then preparing that for the other two, really, I just feel the goodness of God in it, because I do feel like we didn't do it perfectly, but the things that we sowed, we are getting to see some of those rewards, and it's really a sweet season. But I do understand that every family is different, and that might not be everybody's story. So my heart today would be to say, at any stage that your kid is in, if you're hearing this and you've got toddlers and you think that's so far away, or if you have teenagers and the reason you're watching is because you're pulling your hair out because nothing is working, I just want to say there is so much hope and there's so much grace. And sometimes just a few shifts in your thinking and a few tweaks can really make a big difference for your time.
So good. And I love how you pointed out one of the things that I just want to reiterate that you said is, I believe it is a lie from the pit of hell when we buy into the world's view that the teen years have to be hard, because they don't have to be hard, and like you said, a lot of that, taking the time to be intentional when they're young, matters. Yes. And being on our knees, intentional that we're seeking the heart of God and how to parent our kids. But there is fruit that is born when we do the work. What would you say, maybe for the mom who has, toddlers at home, and I believe that there is a foundation that has to be laid. One of the things that we did early is we kind of had a lot of rules when they were little, but we viewed parenting as you have a lot of boundaries and a lot of rules when they're young, and each year you're gradually loosening the reins so that by the time that they're a senior in high school, I have a senior in high school right now, and we literally just had a talk with her this week about, we've done all this work and we view the senior year as a year of pretty much no rules. Now, I don't mean that there aren't family rules,
Right.
but we're not micromanaging you in the same way we did even last year or the year before, because we want this to be a safe place this year for you to be in that transition of adulthood, so that it's not a shock next year when you leave. And so we create that safe place of, in a year of pretty much, you make your decisions. We're always here for counsel. Most of all, seek the heart of God. But we've trained you for this.
Right.
You know what to do. But what would you say, Blynda, to the mom who has that toddler in preschool? How do you create those boundaries so that you're always you have the foresight and the vision for where you want at 18?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And to respond to even something that you said, you know, we always would kind of tell our kids, very similar to what you're saying, by senior year, you know, it's that parenting, I think it might have been Growing Kids God's Way or something a long time ago, learning about parenting within the funnel, you know, and you don't want to parent outside the funnel, but the funnel changes every year as they grow, that funnel changes. So by senior year, it's like, okay, you're kind of creating your own funnel. These are self-inflicted rules that you can monitor yourself. But what I always loved about that idea is when you allow them to do that their senior year, or whatever that year is before maybe they're launched onto their independent self, is they get to make some of those mistakes under your roof. You know,
Yes.
You're there for the feedback, you're there for the direction and the help a little bit. And so I think that's so healthy, because for the first time for them to ever make a decision on their own to be outside of your home is very intimidating. Mm-hmm. But to get to do that under your roof, if it doesn't go so well, they've got a little bit of a safety net. So that's so great. You know, I would say if I'm talking to the mom of toddlers or young adolescents, and that I know at that moment when it's just about, don't throw the Cheerios on the ground when you are upset, don't throw the tantrum in the store. Like, there's so many things I can go back to in those moments, that the idea of like, someday I'm launching you to be an adult seems so far away. But the thing that comes to my mind, I hope it applies, but what comes to my mind is Todd and I had this kind of 3M idea that we would try to live by, not perfectly, of course. I always want to just state that so much of, I've just got great kids that I think are going to do great things, or world changers, but it is about the grace of God for me. I do not have my life all together. And so I'm always constantly amazed at the grace of God, but the things that we did try. So we had these 3 M's, and we said it's make, model, mentor. Okay. So what we would do is, there's a season in a child's life where you have to make them do something. Mm-hmm. So the toddler years, in my opinion, would be those years. You know, you have to make them clean up their toys. You have to make them make their bed or do their chores or whatever. And that's even more, even through pre-adolescent, there's just a long season of parenting that's about making them. And it may not feel fair to them, and it may not, they don't want to, and whatever. And it's kind of like, but this is the season where I'm making you do these things. Mm-hmm. And you aren't at the age where you can just choose to or not. I have to teach that discipline into you by making you do it. Mm-hmm. Then there is a stage where they move into that model stage, where really the eyes become, they are a little bit more on you. They are learning from what they're catching more than they're being taught, as far as they're modeling behavior that they're seeing. So you've taught them to do it. You're living it, you know. So for instance, quiet time, as your kids are getting older, you know, it may be that when they were younger, I made them, you know, okay, I want you to go and I want you to just spend 3 minutes, you know, praying to God or being in your Bible. I mean, it is very small amounts of time, but kind of making them, just for them to learn the discipline of what it looks like to stop your life and allow the Lord to speak to you. And of course, we want them to be in this continual conversation and relationship with the Lord, but there's a discipline there that had to be made, and then it had to be modeled. But then they get to the age, and that's, I would say, you know, teen years and up, where the role you take is a mentor role. So I'm not making them. And yes, I'm still always going to model it for them, because I'm the person, me and my husband are the ones that God has placed in their lives to be that for them forever. So it's not like I put a stop to the modeling behavior, but really it moves more into a mentoring, where the discussions become more, so what is the Lord teaching you right now? Okay, so you brought me this situation. So what do you think the best way to handle that situation or that relationship is? What do you think? Okay, so you have to navigate, your boss has asked you to work these hours, but you have this thing. What do you think is the best way to handle? So it's a mentoring thing where the question now becomes, I want to input into your life, but I want you first to be the one that has sought the answer, that has tried to use the wisdom that you have and the knowledge of the surround, all of those things. You put it together to come with what you think is the best thing. And then I'm there to mentor and to give you perspective. So for that mom of toddlers, if you feel like right now, all you're doing is barking out orders and don't do this and do this, and you're in the make them phase. Right. And it's a short phase. And it's not to say that they don't think for themselves. It's not that type of thing. It's just understanding the season you're in. Right. And it's not a forever season, but so much about a child being at the mentoring stage comes from that they were at the make stage a little bit, and you think, oh, I don't want to make my kid spend time with God. I don't want it to be a chore. I don't want it to be. It's really not, if you understand the long-term vision of what you're doing. So much about what we have found in parenting is there's long-term vision, but there's short-term action to get there. And a lot of times those short-term actions are where you get weary. It feels repetitive. It feels not fun, maybe boring. It feels like really not very fulfilling, and sometimes it can be. I mean, the toddler stages are super fun too. I really did love every stage of parenting, but it would be silly to say that there weren't some more challenging seasons like that, because you're being pulled on in a lot of directions and not getting what feels like a lot of fruit. The fruit is coming, and that's the encouragement and hope that I want to give. Is it, if you're consistent, not perfect, but if you're just consistent, if you're coming to the Lord and asking him for wisdom for every situation, there's fruit coming for sure.
Well, and I love the idea that we have to recognize that, those early years I view as kind of the war zone, right? That's where we have to, in the battle for their hearts, pointing their hearts to Jesus. Yes. And we have to be intentional with that time and not waste that time, because, just like you've referenced about fruit, just like a farmer or with a vineyard, anything, it takes time to produce fruit. And so often we want to just throw up our hands and get frustrated instead of putting in the time that it takes to invest so that there is fruit in the long run. I think in those early years, being intentional of what we want that 17 and 18 to look like. I've often thought, you don't want to be sitting at their high school graduation thinking of the litany of things that you meant to teach them or you meant to model. And so I know, in those early years, the toddler, the preschool years, they can feel like it's a far away, but it is so short. And if we just take the time to think, okay, what do I want my adult child to look like at 17 or 18 years old? Then we can back up and we can have a game plan. I think a lot of it is having a game plan. Well, by 13, they should know this. Their attitude should be this. Their, first time obedience when they're, 2, 3, 4 years old being implemented. And so then we can back up if we know where we're wanting to land. But so often we don't even have a vision for where we want to land.
It's so true. And the thing is, I know at that young stage, and these are good things to be concerned about, obedience and that sort of thing. But what I really am so thankful that I feel like was a really good tool for Todd and I is capturing the child's heart. Because if you can get them to love you and to love God, then it's not as much about obedience, because obedience becomes a byproduct of a child that loves you and loves God.
Right.
So if you are training just to obedience, then that's just, they'll have behavior modification mentality where they'll just do what they know they need to do to please you, but you haven't captured the heart and you haven't changed the heart. If you're growing them to be people who love God and they love his word, and then they love you, and you cultivate that relationship, not because they have to love you, but because relationally you've taught them, just as you have a relationship with the Father, you have a relationship with us, then there is just a heart as adults. I mean, my heart is to be obedient to the Lord. I want, because I love him. And so it's the same thing. If you can teach a child, I feel like, to love God, to love you, obedience really will be that byproduct. And though that still needs training. That's why the first time obedience and that thing is so important, but it's capturing the heart of that child. And I have 3 very different children. I feel like, I say it often, I feel like I am a first-time parent 3 times over, because whatever I did with the first one doesn't work on the second, and what I did with the second doesn't work with the third. They are individually, all 3, very different, separate, and they're wonderful. I mean, they all just bring so much flavor and life to our family, but I couldn't just always do with the first one and expect my third one. Right. And so because of that, I have to be okay to be seeking the Lord. Okay, this worked with this child. Why doesn't this work with this one? This tactic or this whatever. So for sure there are, because I say it all the time. Okay, me and Todd, it's the same DNA and we're the same parents, yet we got 3 very different children. How did what we did, how did they hear that and interpret that in 3 different ways, you know? But what is similar in it all is capturing their hearts. And then the uniqueness of who they are, the Lord will give you wisdom on how to parent that, how to discipline that, how to, you know, but you don't even understand that there's that uniqueness if you haven't captured their heart.
Right. My dad always said, rules without a relationship lead to rebellion. You know, we have to have a relationship with the Lord for us to, you know, desire to walk with him and obey him. We have to have a relationship with our kids for them to desire to walk in obedience. So the relationship has to be there. Otherwise, it's just a list of rules. Right. And of course, that leads to nothing but rebellion. Right. So if we're talking about how we, you know, set the stage because we want to end up at a certain place and have these amazing adults by the time they're 18, Blynda, what have you found maybe with your oldest daughter, or what you're doing in the season? You and I have similar aged kids of, you know, one's already launched and 2 that are about to launch. You know, 3 and 4 years is not a lot of time before we're in that empty nest stage. And how do we do that well? Have you found that there's, you know, we've talked about the toddler stage. Have you found that there were certain things that you did as you transitioned into those high school years that really helped you navigate them being not just independent, being able to advocate for themselves, and of course having a heart for the Lord, but also just being able to launch without needing you, but also you not needing them? Because I think a lot of launching well doesn't always fall on the kid. It falls on the parents to have open hands so that they can go and fly to be all that God has called them to be. What does that look like in your home?
You know, it's a great question. And I'm going to get into that by saying something that just reminded me that you said a second ago about by the time that they're seniors or whatever, and asking that question, have I done everything? And I want to just encourage the parent that might be asking that, because I was that parent saying, there's no way I've taught her everything she needs to know. I didn't give her enough cooking lessons. I didn't teach her enough about the laundry, and then just real life. She's book smart, but is she street smart? I mean, like all these, you have all these things. And this is one thing that I want to encourage parents, since I have gone past the launch stage and we're into her being adult, is though she's launched, she is still connected in the heart. So there have been many days when she's called and said, Mom, I'm at the store and I don't remember anything about this recipe, or, the encouragement was, I realized, oh, she didn't have to know everything. It's not, my parenting and my relationship with her only shifted. It didn't stop. And so I was like, oh, I can still tell her. I just get to tell her more from I hesitate using the friend term because I am still the parent, but it is more of that relationship.
Transitioned into a friendship because you have laid a foundation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I love that. But I mean, I still get a call very often about, okay, what should I do in this situation or what? And I have loved seeing, I had to have launched her to know that the pressure I felt of, does she know everything in the entire world that she's ever supposed to know, about the Lord, about her character, and I would have this panic, like I've watched, she's now gone, and oh nope, I still get to mentor and train her, because I'm still wanting to be mentored and trained, and I'm pretty old, so it doesn't ever stop. And so that just is an encouragement to anybody out there that, nope, you know what, it changes and shifts, but it doesn't stop. So to answer your question, I think it's interesting because so much about how well someone is launched is a choice on both sides. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a little bit like pregnancy, with Olivia leaving. I remember it in pregnancy, it's like, you love it, you love it, you love it. But I was pregnant through the summer months in Texas. And so she was born in October. So by like July, August, I'm like, when are you getting out of here? I cannot handle this. I love pregnancy, but I'm done with pregnancy. So in a way, that's exactly what launching your child is a little bit like. God does this supernatural thing in your heart, if you let him, to prepare you that when they're ready to go, your heart is also ready to send them. Because I would tell Olivia, I'm like, I'm so mad that you listened to everything we said because you're so ready to soar, and now you're actually going to. I'm so mad at you for doing what we've prayed for you to do. I mean, of course I'm joking, but it's that idea that when you prepared them well, and then they actually do what you prepared them for, of course there is what is a normal feeling of loss. And that is what I had to deal with. It's a normal feeling of loss. I mean, almost a grieving, if you will, that is normal. And it's healthy to do that. I think where I would caution is to not allow yourself that small time of grieving and loss, because if you don't, you will unknowingly be tethered in a way that holds them down from what they are supposed to be doing, because you still feel the need to be their answer to everything, so now, she's a second year college student. So now she's living in an apartment with girls, whereas last year she was on a meal plan because she was in the dorm. So already there's been a lot of more phone calls about how to do this or how to do that, because she's cooking for herself and that sort of thing, which I love, of course. But there's also going to be times where she's just going to ask her roommates, hey, what do we think? And she doesn't need to call me.
Right.
And I have to be okay with that. So when you see a child begin to soar, everything you've prayed for, you have to be, as a parent, truly cognizant that by holding them back is actually counter to everything you've wanted for them. So the preparing is, I think that's what that senior year really does well. If especially if you do it the way you guys are doing it, in that it's an entire year of preparation. I think of Esther or whatever, who spent a year, beautifying herself, just, it's like, there's just things that need preparation. And the older I get, the beautifying, it takes about a year, it feels like, but also so does that senior year is such a good year if you'll let it be, of what does transition look like. It's like a trial and error of launching, because you are giving them the most independence they've ever had, yet they're still somewhat under your roof with the family rules that exist. And if you let them do that well, you will find your heart's more prepared, and they are more prepared for when that final launch happens. So as for instance, maybe a younger teen like my daughter who's a freshman, and I still have 4 years, I have to keep my eye on, I want their heart, and I want to kind of be everything to them. That's a mother's desire. But really, as they get older, there is a level of independence in their thinking and in their actions that is required every year. And really, the example of driving is a good one. Before my son got his license, and he's just a very social kid. And so I was just a taxi driver. I mean, everywhere, between sports and his friends' things and his church events. It was just, and by the time he was almost 16, I was so ready to give him the keys to the car, because I just, but that was a healthy feeling, because he was meant to move to that next step of independence and responsibility for him to become the man that he needs to become. So, I'm not sure if I answered your question about the child, but I do know as the parent, it is just really, really important to recognize you have an active role in launching them, not a passive one. They don't just leave you, because that's just the culture just says, well, when you're 18, you move out of the house and they just leave you. No, you send them, and there is an active part of sending that they really need. They need to know their parents are completely the ones launching them into their next stage, because they don't want to feel, you don't want to emotionally make them feel like they're choosing. If they're leaving you, if they're going and doing what they want to do, they're leaving you, and they're making a severing in the family. You never want them to feel that way. Right. You want them to feel like everybody in this family is girding you and supporting what you're moving into.
I love what you said about the pregnancy and the launch, because I feel like so often we as moms kind of feel like we should wallow in misery when our kids leave. And that, or there's the other extreme of celebrating. And I feel like that it's not an either or. You're celebrating that they're launching into a new season of life. It doesn't mean that you're not sad that they are no longer a part of your everyday 24/7. But I feel like that there is a very healthy balance and excitement when you know that you've been intentional to do the work, and now you're seeing the fruit of your work. And I think there's something to rejoice in, knowing that we have, right before our eyes, we get to watch the soaring process of everything that we've sown into them, everything that we've been intentional, everything that we've felt was mundane or repetitive. We now get to see the fruit of our labor. And so I think that there is something to be said where it's not that you're excited to see them go, like you're not going to miss them. You are going to miss them. But there's a rejoicing to watch that launch and to be excited that they're doing what they're made to do. The other thing that, just as you said something a minute ago, I think about, I've always said that making disciples should begin at home, right? The Great Commission begins in Jerusalem, then to Judea, then to Samaria and the uttermost parts of the world. Right. And making disciples begins in our home. We should be raising up world changers, people who love Jesus inside our homes. But what you said just a minute ago caught my attention when you said that we send them. And it's just like when we just send disciples out into the world, or we send missionaries out into the world from a church, or Jesus sent his disciples and said, okay, now go proclaim. And I think that there's something then, as we've raised and been disciple makers in our home, that there's a celebration of that launching and that sending. And like you said, we're cheering. Everyone else who's still at home, we are cheering for you, but we also are sending you forth to go and make disciples. And so I love that whole, you know, that we've been a part of the disciple making process, and now the sending is time, and blessing them, saying, go and do what God has called you to do. So I think there's such a beautiful analogy to disciple making in the parenting.
You just cannot underestimate what God does in a child's heart if they have been raised in the Lord. By the time they are 18, ready to go, it's a little bit like you know, just the idea of somebody who just spiritually gets fat, you know, because all they do is input, you know, and they don't find a way to serve, and they don't find a way. It's kind of the same way when you have a child who has been input and they've been told their whole lives, you have purpose, you're going to be a world changer. If you don't ever give them that opportunity to then go and do that, there's actually a tug of war that begins to happen in their heart, because they know they're made for something more. And yet they don't want to hurt the parents or whatever, disappoint them if they seem to go and thrive without them. And so, you know, you just have to be okay that this is the way God designed it. And it is about making disciples. And I believe it was one of the Stanleys, maybe Charles Stanley or whatever, that said, my greatest contribution to the kingdom of God isn't what I do, but who I raise. That's my greatest contribution to the kingdom of God. I could have a lot of accolades behind my name of things that I've had to do, but it's who I raised that I truly see as my greatest calling. And so because of that, once I do raise them and send them out, I have to be okay to let God then go and do that. You know, I know as a parent, like one of my prayers when I was younger is, Lord, I want them, whatever you have for them, but I just don't know if I could send them like to Africa. So maybe don't make them missionaries, but maybe anything else. I mean, you know, that idea when you're little, because you just don't, but the truth is, as hard as it is, the open-handedness of parenting says, you've given them to me to steward as a gift for a very short amount of time. But in reality, in the span of their life, the call on their life that you have for them far outreaches the small amount of time they're in my home. And I want them to feel like they can say yes to the Lord in any way that he calls. And so it's actually very exciting if you parent from the beginning with that mentality, because we live in a tough, dark world. I mean, especially now, there just seems to be darkness all around. There's no shortage of places that your kids can be a light, because darkness is everywhere. And so it's really an exciting time to think, it's a little selfish to think that I want all this light just stuck in my house. I love the idea that a lane light will be out all over the world, you know, shining bright in the dark places. And so it's just a shift in your thinking, that you just don't hold on so tightly that they can't for themselves let the Lord speak to them about what their future holds. And, you know, I was kind of reminded of something that I wrote down. One important thing that Todd and I did is we had to always know when to draw the line and when to give them a push. And so much in those, maybe not toddler, but maybe young preteen to preteen years, if you can learn that fine dance of when you draw the line and when you give them a push, because foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. We know that. So there are times when you have to draw the line. Entitlement is something that comes to my mind. I know that we draw the line when we see entitlement coming up in our child's heart. Okay, we draw the line and we have to backtrack on, okay, how did we get here? But then there are times when we really have to say, I'm not going to draw a line here. I'm going to give them a push, and I'm going to let them navigate this instance or this situation kind of on their own. And doing that, starting about that preteen of, okay, is this a time I'm drawing the line because I'm protecting them, or they are acting foolish and they've crossed a value of our home, you know, whatever that is, you have to establish what that is. Or is this a time that I say, you know what? I'm going to let you keep going the way you're going, and let's just see where we get. And the thing that's hard about that is nobody wants a child to fail. Nobody wants to set a child up for failure. I'm always wanting to set a child up for success, but sometimes long-term success is made from a few short-term mistakes or failures. And so of course that's why you have to identify if they're crossing a line, that you've drawn a line and they're wanting to cross it in morals or values. That's not what I'm talking about. That's when you draw the line. But if it's something that isn't going to compromise your family's values, but you can give them a little push to see what would you do in this situation? I think take advantage of those opportunities in their teen years, because you'll get an insight into how they make decisions, how they assess the situation. And it's so helpful. So when they're launched, it's not like they've never made a decision on their own before.
Right.
You know?
That's so good. And just being able to have those healthy, safe places to fail, because I think something that we rob our kids from in today's society is the opportunity to fail. And with failure comes success, because we have to learn. And it doesn't mean that we expose them to the world and just throw them out to the wolves of saying, you know, here are all your options. But it's the opportunity for us to give them places in safe ways to us not micromanaging, making all the decisions, which leads me to the next point, Blynda, that I would like to get your perspective on. We live in a society that has wanted to not allow our kids to fail. We want everyone to get a trophy. And we also have collectively shifted the whole parenting paradigm to think that our job as parents is to helicopter and micromanage every situation, or to snowplow and just remove all obstacles so that they never experience the hurt knee and the failure. Both extremes are bad. I've kind of offered a counter to that, is we should be like trampoline parents. We should give them the tools they need to bounce back. In order to launch successfully, I believe we need to really remove the whole helicopter and snowplow parenting mentality, because otherwise our temptation is they launch and then we're still micromanaging everything that they're doing in college. And I've seen this play out with, you know, people close in my life, as well as, you know, just observing life, of recognizing, you know, there's still a lot of parents that are wanting to be the child's only resource, or the mom has done everything for the kid, that they still feel like it's their job to interact with the professor. They still feel like it's their job to micromanage where their child is at 11:30 at night. How have you seen that play out as you've actually launched one of yours, in being able to, yes, free hands, your job has changed, now your role is mentorship? How's that played out in the Lane house?
You know, it's funny, I have to answer that question. I kind of have to go back to my household growing up. So I grew up in West Texas, and both my parents were educators. They both worked full time. And it was just a generation, I feel like. But it was a little bit like, especially in the summers, it was like, go outside and play and come back at dinner. And there was no Life 360, and there was no cell phones even. And I grew up in this mentality of, I'm a little bit on my own, you know, and I don't necessarily recommend that either. I think that probably there were instances that wasn't the best idea. But it's the idea that something about being raised that way kind of stuck with me. And I often joke, and I hope the viewers, you know, they don't know me that well. I often joke that because I'm a little bit of a mess, don't have my life perfectly together, that actually made me a better parent, because I really feel like the mom, the superwoman mom that is like completely put together, and all of her I's are dotted and her T's are crossed, and nothing is ever out of place in her house, and her laundry is always done, and her meals are always perfect, and her hair is always done. those are also the parents who they make sure their kids have their full perfect lunchbox and everything for the kid is done perfectly and they don't miss a beat and they're at every PTA meeting there. And I love that mom. That's just not the mom I was. I'm just a little bit short on being a altogether mom. What that did though, the actual positive byproduct of that is my children from a very young age had to learn to kind of be independent and think for themselves, because it could be that if they didn't make their lunch, they weren't eating that day. I don't know. So I'm just kidding. But in a way, you know, I never felt that pressure to be a perfect mom. And I'm not saying that I don't struggle with perfectionism, or I think I learned early on. I just was somebody who observed a lot of perfect moms, and I'm somebody who kind of went, oh, I'll never be that. So I just kind of didn't even enter the competition. But what I think, I know I'm kind of making a joke, but really the point I'm saying is it actually could, if I'm speaking to the mom who feels so much pressure to be a part of every detail and every moment and make sure no ball is dropped and make sure nothing goes wrong and make sure every teacher relationship is, you know, to all of that pressure, I want to say be free of that pressure. Release some of that tension and pressure. Ask the Lord, what is motivating you? Why are you driven to be everything and all things to all of your kids all of the time? Right. It's not, there's no shame that you feel that way. There's no correction here. It's just a question I think is important. I think somebody, I'm thankful, came along and asked me the question of maybe, could you step it up a little bit? Maybe, could you, you know, I don't know, do you want to brush their hair? Is that, you know, I might have needed to be asked that question. So we all can have moments of growth. I'm just speaking to the mom that maybe feels that pressure to be perfect, that pressure to be everything to the child. And I just want to say, first off, only the Lord can be everything to your child. And only the Lord can really put together the steps. You know, I mean, we try to determine the steps for our lives and for our child's life, but we know from scripture that only the Father determines the plans for the child's life, even though we try to dictate the steps. And so I think it's important to remember, of course, he's entrusted them to us. So he knows that we are the biggest and best influence in their life. And I am not trying to discard that at all. But what I'm really trying to say, and I know I tried to make some jokes about it, it's really just to say that the grace the Lord gives is that you are not bound by perfectionism, and you're not even bound by the idea that you have to be every answer to your child. It's a lot of freedom to walk in. The Lord is that for them, and life is going to happen. And sometimes the Lord has things for the child that we may not have. If we were in control, we might not do it that way. How many times have we said that in our life? Gosh, God, if I was in control, I would have done something different. Yeah. You're going to see, that's when a helicopter parent really comes in play. Wait, I don't like what's happening here. I want to kind of control. I want to kind of make it. And I just want to encourage that listener today. The most freedom you will find in parenting and the most enjoyment you'll get out of the relationship with your child is when there is an amount of freedom and control that you let go of to allow freedom to happen. I think it's a little bit damaging to the relationship if you are a parent that is the end all be all to every circumstance and situation in their life. Right. Sometimes they need that rope given to them a little bit to sink or swim. And of course you'll be there to help them. But you know, we do live in an entitled society. And so many times I find an interesting correlation between helicopter parents and entitled children. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the correlation I find is at any moment that something doesn't go exactly like it should for the child, the parent steps in. Well, the child sees that situation happen, and the only way they interpret that is, look, I'm entitled to everything working out for me. Yes. Yeah. I'm entitled for my mom to step in and to get me the exact thing that I wanted. I'm entitled to that now. And you just have to caution yourself, you know, about falling into that trap of, I want to make the way perfect for my child because I don't want them to feel pain. Right. I don't want my children to feel pain. Please hear me. I don't. But I want more than anything for them to know what it's like to hold on to Jesus through any circumstance that comes their way.
Well, and I think a couple of things that you bring up is, you know, whether it's the helicopter parenting, a lot of times that's very fear-based. Mm-hmm. Because we're wanting to protect. It's also out of control of the reflection that it makes on me as the parent. Yeah, and so point. I think that there's with the entitlement issue, but there's also the reflection of what kind of image am I putting forth to the people around me, to my friend group, to the school, to the PTO. And so I think that the image is driven out of one of control and fear, instead of being able to look and see again, how do I want my child to be at 18? What boundaries do I need to have in place? What teaching tools do I need to have in place so that we can get there? And instead, we're so self-focused on how it's making me appear or fear of what could happen. You mentioned about you don't want your children to be in pain. And I 100% agree with you. I don't want my children to experience pain. At the same time, life is full of pain and disappointment. And so we should be able to teach our children how to navigate disappointment. Mm-hmm. Yep. And so again, it's that reliance on Jesus, that he is our fulfillment. But you know, there's going to be people who suffer job loss. There's going to be people who deal with infertility. There's going to be people who deal with health issues. And so being able to navigate pain and loss, as opposed to always removing pain and loss, so that our kids are just caught deer in the headlights of, I've never had to experience any kind of disappointment. There's a brilliant writer who wrote a book, How to Raise an Adult. And she does such an exceptional job of displaying how kids arrive to college. She was a college admissions coordinator. And so she saw the kids land in college, but she also saw the kids leave college. And I think what she pointed out so brilliantly is, Julie Lithcott-Kames is her name. She pointed out so brilliantly that the kids who arrive to college and have no idea how to get the couch upstairs into their room because they've never had to ask for help, or the kid who doesn't know how to interact with a boss when they leave college because the mom has always been doing everything for them. And so again, one of the things I think as we begin to wrap up is pointing out that we want to prepare our kids for launch, but it's also really important how we navigate the launch afterwards when they do go to college, because we don't want to still be doing everything for them to the point of stifling them from being able to be independent, successful adults. Because if we're still trying to arrange things for them, or be the mediator with professors, or be the mediator with bosses, there's an amazing and an astounding statistic of parents who go to job interviews with their kids that is horrifying. And so I think, again, not only at the toddler age do we need to see what we want them to look like by 18, we also need to, again, model and facilitate ways for them to be an adult once they do launch and not still micromanage.
Yes. And, you know, I think it's an important thing to note, you know, nothing that we're saying here are we saying this is a hands-off approach to parenting.
Absolutely.
You know, we kids, by the time they're 15, they should be able to raise themselves.
Right. That is not what we're saying.
It's just really not at all. In fact, what it is I would say that the involvement that I got to have in my children's lives, you know, Olivia through high school and even now is I mean, I would say I am a very involved parent. Right. I know their friends. I know what they're doing. there is a difference. And I think that is so much about parenting in general, is understanding so much about the word balance. What we're saying is it's not this all or nothing. If I don't want a helicopter parent, then I don't parent at all. It's not at all. It's understanding, because since the toddler years, you've been understanding their heart. It's always focusing on, I want this little heart to end up being somebody who is a productive member of society as an adult. So they're going to have their personalities and they're going to have their bents. And so one child might need my attention more than another in a certain area. And that doesn't mean I've helicoptered this one and not this one. You are the one given the gift of discernment for your children, because God saw it fit to make you their parent. Mm-hmm. And so with each child, I might have to intervene here and there a little bit for an issue that's happened or whatever. So I want to be clear. I'm very involved, and I have had to intervene. And I sometimes, depending on the situation, it's really more of a principle that we're talking about, in that if the idea is to launch independent thinkers who love the Lord and love others, love themselves, all of those things, want to serve, all of that, there is just this idea that you cannot be in control of every situation in their life. You just cannot. And it takes coming to the Lord and asking the Holy Spirit to give you the wisdom on when you need to be involved and when you need to sit back. I find it so fascinating that this woman observed these college kids, because I think it's so true. Even in just the short time that I've watched Olivia, I think the freshman dropout rate of college is pretty high, and I do think that it is that idea that once they're on their own, they either go hog wild, mm-hmm. and they never go to class and they fail out, or the pressures to perform are too high and they fail out. I mean, there's just so many things. And so I just think parenting with balance, it's just such an important thing. And I think only God can really calibrate that for you. There's ways that we can help, but God has to really help you with each individual child, what that looks like, because I have a child who I feel it benefits this child for me to be a little bit more involved, mm-hmm. Not to take care of everything for them, but just to stay on things a little bit more. And I just have some naturally more independent child where, so you just have to really seek the Lord on what that is. So I want there to be freedom, that we're not saying trade one for the other. We're not saying, since we don't want you to be a helicopter parent, now you're done. You don't have to parent again.
Well, and it's not an all or nothing. I think for me, it's casting a vision for parents to look at the parenting styles that the world is teaching and offering.
Yes.
And again, recognizing the world's ways are not God's ways. True. And so that is my heart in this conversation, is to recognize God's principles are spelled out in the Bible. There's discipline, there's boundaries, there's love. And so if we seek the heart of God in how we parent and raise world changers, making disciples at home and sending them forth, is a different approach than the world's way, yes. Which is constant micromanaging and constant removing failure and all obstacles. And so just to change and shift, to recognize that I feel like as a society, we've bought into the lies of the way the world says to parent our children, as opposed to really casting vision for a generation that seeks the heart of God for how we parent. And I think that there's such a chasm of a huge difference of, seeking God's ways versus the world's ways. And so casting vision for, hey, this is doable. It is being intentional. It is being involved. It is disciplining. It is having boundaries. It's not a hands-off approach, but it's also recognizing, okay, where do we want to end up? Yep. Because we do want to be able to see them successful in all that God has called them to be. One thing, and again, if you have any closing remarks, the one closing remark that I'll make is, you said about sending them forth, and Lord, not Africa. I think, I know you're joking about that, but I think that as a parent, we don't want to see anything scary, right, for our kids. And yet I've always told my kids the safest place to be is in the center of God's will.
Yes.
And whatever that looks like, then for me as a mom and as a parent to be able to, again, open palms to the will of God, because the safest place for them is in God's will. And for, again, that early years of training them to look and seek the heart of God, equipping them to know and discern the heart of God, so that then they can be in the center of his will and all that God's called for their lives, and wanting to do, because our entire purpose in being created is to know God and to make him known. And that's what we want for our children. So with that, Blynda, I believe we're about out of time, but do you have any closing remarks that you'd like to share with our audience?
Thank you for having me. It's been so enjoyable. You know, the scripture that comes to mind is Romans 12:2, that says, do not be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you will test and see the perfect and good will of God. And I think as parents, if we can remember that the world has an agenda, the world has a way that they're wanting to tell us to raise our kids. But if we do not give into the way of the world, the pattern of the world, but if we are renewing our minds, if we're teaching our kids to renew their minds through the word of God, they'll be transformed. That word transformed is so important, because it's just like you said, the safest place we will be is when we know the perfect and good will of God, and when we trust that his ways are best for us. Right. So I want to encourage all the parents listening that God, when he created and formed that child in your womb, or in whoever's womb, and then you ended up getting those children as your own, he had a perfect and good will for them. And it just, as a steward of those children, all he asks us to do is to not give in. Don't easily be swayed by what the world is telling you. Right. Come to him and seek him. His ways work. So seek his word and know what his perfect and good will is for your family and for that individual child, and let him transform your thinking. If you didn't have that kind of family growing up, and you are a first generation believer or a first generation of wanting to raise godly kids, that scripture promises that seeking his will transform your mind into a new way of thinking. And I just want to encourage the parents out there, you're doing better than you think you are. God has got them in the palm of his hands, and there's so much grace, 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 because we aren't called to be perfect parents. We're just called to teach them about the love of God, how much he loves them, and how much we love them.
His mercies are new every morning.
Every morning. I'm so thankful for that.
And it's never too late.
Never too late.
Power of prayer, it's never too late. So pray for your kids. Blynda, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your wisdom and just sharing your story. I know that as fellow moms in the same season of life, we are not perfect, but we do desire to walk in obedience to what God has called us to do. And I admire that about you. So thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for our audience members joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.